Hello, everyone. Welcome into today's session, Building the Future Ready Workforce, Mid-Year Trends and Insights. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating today's session. We are on Zoom for today's session, and we will be emailing you a copy of this recording after the webinar concludes. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or our Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I'll hand it right over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks, Mariela. And we will have multiple polls throughout because we're going to want to get feedback and better understand who we have with us today. So please, definitely ask questions, add comments, and if we don't get to it throughout the webinar, we will have a Q&A afterwards. So welcome, everyone. My name is Tiffany Textor. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Educate 360. And at the beginning of the year, we published a workforce skills and trends report. And we found that AI was moving quickly. Organizations were struggling to keep processes and leadership to guide teams through the changes. And so we're halfway through the year. Hard to believe. And we wanted to revisit those trends and look at what's changed, what are organizations struggling with now. And so I have our Amy Farber, our Chief Strategy Officer, and Tynan Fisher, our Senior Vice President of Learning. And they're going to join me, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the workforce AI skills trends today. So Amy, let's start big picture. How has the conversation changed? At the beginning of the year, everyone was talking about adopting AI. Are companies still focused on adoption, or has the conversation moved on from adoption?
Great question. Thank you so much, Tiffany. So excited to have this conversation today. So certainly, it's still 2026, and so AI is still the focus of a lot of conversations that we're having. However, I would argue that the conversations have only gotten bigger and deeper since the very beginning of the year. Earlier in the year, a lot of companies were asking which tool we should buy, whether we should buy Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude, and figuring out, how pervasively they wanted those tools to be distributed within their organizations. They were planning on having a, center of excellence of AI champions and a pilot cohort to test the different tools. And then kind of maybe March, April, we started seeing the trend of really shifting the conversation of, okay, we made some early investments in a tool of our choosing. We've gotten a couple people to have access to these licenses. How do we start to get employees to use them? And so that's really where the bulk of questions are at this point, halfway through the year. It's, how should the ways of working shift as a reflection of the introduction of a new colleague, an AI tool? How should our processes change? Which tasks should AI help with versus, our employees? And how do we actually start to see business value from the promise of AI and the efficiency and productivity gains that the tool is fully capable of?
So it's less about are people using it, and it's how are they using it. And I think that our recent data backs that up too, that a company can have really high AI usage and still not feel like they're really in the transformation mode. And so I want to just do our first poll and understand what best describes your current use of AI. How is everybody using it right now? Are you just still in exploration? Are you really redesigning work and measuring the business impact? Let's get an idea of where everybody is. All right, I'll give it a few more minutes. Looks like about 50% participation. Lots of still exploring, and that's okay. We're finding organizations of all sizes that are either just beginning to ask the questions, and you just have to meet organizations where they are with their skills needs. So I will share the results of our poll. So yeah, it seems like very few are really redesigning and have a formal AI training program underway, and yeah, that's okay. So a lot are still are still starting. And so Tynan, based on these results, I think that the skills questions look different depending on whether you're exploring or you're already using it. So let's talk about that. Are we overcomplicating the skills? We thought that it had to be very technical at first, and a lot of people think that AI skills is understanding how to actually build AI, when in reality, what should companies be preparing for and what skills should they be looking for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Tiffany, and welcome everybody. Just to say hi. No, I think if you treat it that way or you think about it that way, it can actually run you down a rabbit hole a little bit, and you'll waste a lot of training dollars training people from a technology aspect and things that maybe aren't relevant. But we are seeing a pretty consistent pattern with all the clients that we work with, and part of that is they end up buying an AI tool, whatever that is, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever that happens to be. And they hand it to an employee initially, and they say, well, hey, good news is you're better than you were yesterday because we just gave you an AI tool. And that might be slightly true, but it doesn't really land. And if you treat AI just like another software purchase, which is kind of where everybody starts, unfortunately, it just doesn't work out, and it doesn't, and it's not going to help you with sustained growth or change or adoption. So, and really, what has to happen is there has to be a shift in the way that you do work, and that shift is really adopting, for lack of a better term, just an AI first mindset. And so when you're looking at the work that you're doing on a daily basis, the first question should be, well, where does AI fit into this task, and into this workload? And how do I lead with AI from here? And employees have to make that mind shift. And they can't just fall into the ways that they always did things, which is really, normal. When you're under stress or under deadlines, you're just going to do things the way you always used to do them. And you have to really change the way that you're approaching work. And that shift does look different depending on the role. And just to give you a couple examples, if you're from a manager perspective, if your team is now leveraging AI and you've rolled it out and they're doing AI supported work, your manager needs to know how to review that stuff. They need to understand how to ask, where was AI used? Maybe even, is it appropriate for us to be using AI, or where should we be using AI? And then how to coach somebody through first draft, first iterations that they get from the tool. If you look at it from a project manager standpoint, it's really easy to just build a project plan. You can just bang it out. You can have it flag risks that might show up in your project schedule. And so it kind of shifts from doing that kind of work to evaluating the output. And are the risks that it identified, are they really real? And identifying maybe areas that AI didn't miss, right? Because it could overlook that stuff. And we've seen this, another kind of an example for you. I was working with a large engineering client, and they rolled out Copilot training, just as an example, and they broadly painted everybody with the same brush and did the usual, which is, we're going to level everybody's skill sets and start from the same place. But the immediate feedback was from their engineers came back and said, this really doesn't reflect the way we do work. It doesn't fit in with our workflows. So what we did is we worked with the engineering firm to really rebuild or reinvent the way that they were doing training, so there was more in line with the way that they do work. And if you want to do a quick test in your own organization, you can just simply go around and ask, 3 to 5 people in different roles, and you can ask them one question: what do you do differently in your job because of AI? And if the answers are vague, or they kind of all start to sound the same, then you don't have a skill strategy, unfortunately. What you have is a brand new piece of software and a software license. And so you really have to think about that.
And we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing a lot of people who say, okay, we have the tools, great, but the tool isn't really a problem. It's maybe that and people know how to prompt maybe, and they know how to use it, but they're not necessarily seeing business change. So Amy, a lot of companies are running into this. They have the tools and they start using them, but the company doesn't suddenly become faster or better. Why is that?
Yeah, Tynan started to hit on this a bit. So it's more than just utilization of the tool or the software. Tools have, from the beginning of time, fit into processes. And so the processes that are now starting to incorporate the use of these AI tools may still be the problem. So, for example, if someone is using AI and it accelerates their productivity and their responsibility, their task used to take them 2 hours and now it takes them 20 minutes. That's amazing. But if that handoff from that person in the completion of their task then waits 4 days for an approval because the holistic approach wasn't reviewed, the employee got faster, but the workflow itself didn't. And so I think that's a bit of the, disconnect in infusing these AI tools, which is phenomenal starting place and absolutely the right place to get people comfortable on how to utilize them to accelerate their task completion. But then it's really the linkage of different tasks together in a holistic process that needs to be reviewed to see a real impact.
So really, before you start automating things, you need to take a step back and look at the entire process.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you add AI to a bad process, you can't expect magic. It'll actually probably just exacerbate, because then that person who's getting their 2-hour task done in 20 minutes is going to start, it's a bottleneck. It's like the progression line. We've all seen the Lucille Ball progression line where it just gets up. And so suddenly there's a huge bottleneck. So that's a really interesting way of thinking about what the barriers are. And our data showed that, 60% of respondents thought that unclear workflows and unclear ownership was a barrier. And I want to add another poll if I can do so. Mariella usually does the technical part of this, so bear with me for just a second. But I am interested in what the biggest barriers are that our audience is seeing to really getting value from AI. Maybe not using AI, but what is the biggest barrier to get the value out of it and measure that value?
While folks are completing that survey, one point I might add is some of our kind of more mature clients on the maturity curve are really doing a lot of process mapping work and Six Sigma work to look at some of their more complex workflows in that holistic view and understand where the handoffs are, where the bottlenecks are, so that they can start to drive more efficiency in the holistic process, not just at the task level. So I thought that was interesting because, certainly doesn't immediately come to mind, oh, I'm doing AI transformation. I'm doing a big AI initiative in my organization. Let me do Lean Six Sigma. But actually, there's a really important tie there that folks are starting to uncover.
So what's interesting is, when we're looking at the answers of what the biggest barriers are, the skills and the confidence are definitely there. But a lot of it is processes, it's workflows, it's leadership. And so what we're seeing is people are starting to experiment on their own. If leadership and governance is slowing people down, and the processes and the workflows aren't ready yet, and people are starting to explore, Tynan, how do you handle that? Is that a good thing, or having your employees explore on their own, is that creating problems?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always the people who are early adopters in any technology, whatever that is, right? So you're naturally going to have that with AI as well too, and within your organizations. To answer your question, though, it can be both. I mean, honestly, it's all that exists within can exist within the same company, and on one hand, you have your experimenters. They're curious. They move fast. They are finding real use cases that they can use that stuff, and there's incredible value in that, right? Those people, they're showing you what the possibilities are for AI, and they're identifying early wins, that could potentially be propagated throughout the organization. But there are two little problems that kind of linger below the surface there, and the first is that early adopters, maybe using tools that are not supported by the organization, or shadow IT products is typically how they refer to them on the IT side, that they just live out there and nobody knows that they're being used. So there's that. That's a bit of a challenge. Secondly is those early adopters, if they're out there and they're doing the work and they leave the organization, all that good that came from the little projects that they were working on and the experimentation, unfortunately, it leaves with them as well too. And so you kind of, have a little bit of a brain drain when it comes to that early adoption. For everybody else within the organization, well, they're sitting there thinking about, the questions that they have. They're maybe a little bit more reserved in their approach, and they want to know, where does the company stand on stuff? So, am I allowed to use ChatGPT? Am I allowed to use Copilot? What information can I type in here? Because should I be worried about that? How do I know if the answer is right? Because everyone is very skeptical about anything they get from AI, and they should be, right? And then there's also, does my manager even support this? And I think that's a concern that people have. Now, what I can tell you is all those questions get answered, and as an organization matures in their AI model, but those are very normal things that happen in the beginning. So if you're sitting there going, yeah, I have all those same questions, well, you and everybody else, right? So you don't have to feel like you're on an island from that standpoint. But your organization does have to look and establish, AI policies and governance. What is the acceptable use policy? What's your AI ethics policy, data governance? Do you have clear procedures on how that's going to work? And all those things, if they're in place, well, then you've answered a lot of the majority of the questions that your employees would have. But there's also a second step that companies miss, and that's that they spend a lot of time writing those things, and they spend a lot of time putting them in place, and then they don't communicate it effectively, right? And it lives somewhere that nobody reads. And that might as well be the same as not saying anything at all. And we see that all the time. We've seen some really good AI policies and ethics and governance and all that kind of stuff that just lives quietly in the background without anybody's knowledge. And so as far as the workforce is concerned, it doesn't exist. And they're still guessing. And there's still a gap between your early adopters and the rest of the company. So the fix really comes down to, there's three parts. Is first, you have to make sure you have your governance. It's actually established and it's communicated. So everybody knows what's acceptable and what they can and cannot do. You have to have training in the context of real world work, which we really talked about as well too earlier. And they also need a safe space to practice, because, that's the only way you're going to get good at this. And it's not, AI is not like a normal software application, right? If you go in Excel and you click here and you click here and you type in the right formula, you get the same repeated results every single time. That is not the case with AI. You can get multiple versions. You can get different responses. You can go down the rabbit hole and something can shift entirely during that entire process. And so people have to get comfortable with that. So one more thing, I guess I would just add too, because I want to go back to the early experimenters. Don't shun them. Don't dismiss them. Make them visible. I think celebrate what they're doing as well, and it'll help get the creative juices flowing of how to leverage AI. So just don't forget about them.
Great. And as we saw, it does seem like a lot of people are learning and experimenting on their own. So, we are here to really talk about skills and training. So I did want to also ask how our audience is currently building skills. Is it a company-wide AI training initiative? Is it role-based? And I think what you said is so important is that you have to train in real work. Because training for someone on a project management team might be very different from the training on the IT team or the analyst or the marketers. So interested in how are you currently building your AI skills? Can you guys see the poll? I'm not seeing any answers. So
it came up for a second and then it disappeared. Yeah.
Okay, let me relaunch it. There we go. And another thing that I heard you say, Tynan, that I do want to touch on a little bit more is the managers. We saw in our research that middle managers are just feeling the squeeze. They're feeling it from the top, they're feeling it from the bottom. I saw some comments about there's governance, there's security, there's all these things that you have to, as a manager, make sure that your team is being compliant with, while also having a mandate from leadership to be AI forward. And so I really want to understand, how important is it for managers? Amy, why are they so important? And I'll end the poll and share before we get into that, but it does seem like most people are learning on their own. And that's hard because you're learning on your own. And how are you then not only distilling the information, who are you sharing that with? But then again, as a manager, if you're not being trained on the skills that you need, how do you then support your teams to adopt from this executive mandate? So Amy, can you talk to a little bit more about that?
I mean, managers are so critical here. They really set the tone and expectations on a day-to-day basis because employees experience change through their manager, right? So the executive team can say, we're going all in on AI and here's our big AI strategy, but employees are going to go to their manager. They're not going to go to the CEO with their questions and ask, what does this mean for my job? What should I be trying? What's allowed? What's not allowed? Like, what does this mean about how we do our work? And so it's really, that manager level that is translating the AI vision and strategy on a day-to-day basis. And that's a tricky place for managers to be because what we often see is a company will roll out AI training, the managers will participate in that training, and now the manager knows how to use the tool. But that was never the manager's real job in terms of the change management role that they would play in helping their direct reports and their employees embrace and fully maximize the use of the AI tools that they've been licensed. So, managers kind of need a different set of skills. Yes, they absolutely need to know how to use the tools, and answer questions of their employees about interface and things like that. But more importantly, the managers need to know how to coach employees, and know how to review that AI supported work products to actually live the change that the leadership team wants to see in the organizations. And I think something that's often missed in the role of the manager in this age of AI is the responsibility to actively talk about AI. Like if you put yourself in the employee's seat for a second, if my manager never mentions AI, never points out where it could help me, never references the training that we went through, I'm inherently going to draw a conclusion that my manager doesn't support the use of this. So either I'm going to just not use it because I went through that training once, but then it hasn't really come up since, or I think this AI stuff is pretty cool, but I'm not really going to mention it too much because I'm afraid that my manager is going to think that I'm cutting corners or cheating, right? And so the silence from managers on the topic of AI is actually what kills adoption. And that is something that is often entirely missed by that band of employee within an organization because they play such a critical role in the change management.
Yeah, we've seen that so much. And you raise a good point that managers, one, they do need to know how to use the tool because people are going to come to them and ask like, hey, like, how do I add a file to this? What are the best prompts? And then they also need a second set of tools that are, the human skills, the soft skills of critical thinking. You have to really have critical decision making when you're looking at AI work and output and say, is this correct? Am I asking the right questions? You need to have change management. You need to navigate difficult conversations because if employees feel like they're cheating or they're saving extra time and the manager isn't supporting that, you need to have those conversations and be able to navigate that. So before we say managers go drive adoption, which is really what's going to lead the change in the organization, we need to ask whether we're giving them the skills to do so. And so I'd love to also just test that theory with our audience, and ask again, like, do you feel like your managers are prepared for AI? And Keith, yeah, there's frequently a lot of yes to all of these things. We shouldn't make them multiple choice. We should probably say choose all that you agree with, because I think a lot of it is one or the other. And as we're waiting for these to come in, I'm suspecting that the middle two, there's probably very few that are at the upper echelons of very prepared based on what we're seeing. And again, to your point, Tynan, AI was a software adoption and not necessarily a human skills adoption. And so a lot of organizations have a bigger skills question about human skills and why are they most important? And, instead of just thinking about technology, should we really be thinking about the human skills behind AI? So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. 0% feel like managers in their organization are very prepared. So, most managers are somewhat prepared. It varies, or they're figuring out themselves, or they understand, but they haven't been trained to lead. So let's talk about that. What can organizations be doing to help with manager training?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think more than just manager training, let's talk about employee first. I think so. I want you guys to think of this way. Every employee in your company today got a new employee overnight, right? And they were assigned this new employee, and whatever its name is, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever its name is, right?
The awesome intern, AI,
Yeah, the
awesome
intern. Yeah, and some people have fun names too, right? Because that's really what AI works at, or it really is meant to be. And it has extensive knowledge. There's no doubt about it. The average of the internet. It's willing to do just about anything you ask, and it works around the clock. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't rest, it doesn't do any of that stuff. But like any new employee, it has to have clear direction. It needs to know what you expect. What does good look like? Where does the information come from? Where does it need to connect to get to that information? And you, as the individual, whether it's management or whether it's an employee, you have to review that work, because AI will confidently give you an incredibly polished wrong answer or a mediocre answer, and it'll serve it up. That is also directly relevant to the quality of the data that resides inside of your organization as well, too, which that's kind of a big issue now, too. So here's the problem. The problem is that you're asking employees to do something that they've never done before. Some probably have never managed a single person, nor did they ever want to, right? They've never had to delegate work. They've never had to explain how a workflow works when that person is coming from the outside of that workflow process. They've never had to review anybody's work. They've never had to give feedback. They've never had to provide coaching, right? So those are typically skills that managers were trained to do, right? Or team leads were trained to do. So we're now asking every employee to do something they've never done. They've never been trained to do that. And then we just say, congratulations, you have a new tool, and go figure it out. And it's more than just the technology, it's those skills. And so that presents a pretty big issue. And that's why I think the human skills are really surging forward. And I think it probably will become one of the biggest things that people have to master. They're going to have to learn how to delegate. They're going to learn how to set expectations. They're going to have to learn how to review work and giving direction. And those used to be leadership, but they're going to be an everyday people skill, because they have this employee, whether they wanted it or not, they've got it now. And so they have to work with it. And from a management standpoint, same thing. I mean, Amy kind of alluded to this. I mean, you have to, from a management standpoint, you have to be able to help facilitate this. You have to be able to help people integrate it into the day. We're changing the way people work. So there's change management skills. There's, soft versions of like eliciting requirements and being able to, help people understand where does AI fit, what is appropriate, all that stuff. So nobody's immune to it. That's the thing is it's everybody is impacted in some way. And it's taking, well, I guess for lack of a better term, it will help you enhance the human experience if you let it, but you have to understand how to do that, right? So a little bit of a long-winded answer there, but
no, but I mean, I think the point is so well taken, and it sounds daunting, right? If you're an employee who's never managed anyone else, and now you have a junior resource reporting to you, right? The great news is that all of those skills around delegation and coaching and feedback, those are learnable skills, right? And so I think the point is spot on, Tynan. Like those used to be considered leadership skills, and managers used to kind of sharpen their toolkits around some of those, but now it's really the onus is on everyone who touches an AI tool to get upskilled in some of those key human skill areas, and that's a doable, accomplishable thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And what's also interesting is, I think that the training role has been so siloed of here's leadership training, here's technical training. And, what have you seen, Tynan, as far as, how training has become more holistic and less siloed across departments?
Yeah. So again, let's go back to the employee. And when they're working with AI supported tasks, right? They have to identify work that's appropriate for AI. That's a first start. Then they have to figure out, how to leverage the tool to accomplish that. They have to evaluate the output, and then they have to make sure and decide whether it's accurate, and if not, how do they iterate on that? And then they have to decide what to do with that information from that standpoint. And then at the last part is, I guess for lack of a term, communicate and communicate the results, whatever that means. Could be a dashboard, it could be a report, it could be a presentation, it could be anything really. And so that you in that one exercise or that one workflow, you're talking about technical skills, you're talking about critical thinking, you're talking about judgment, you're talking about communication, you're talking about delegation, you're talking about all these things that are happening all at the same time. And so most companies, they fund that type of training or that type of learning differently, right? It's like, well, the technical skills, the IT department handles that, and that comes out of that funding bucket. And the learning group, they fund the leadership training, and then there's other training over here for this. And if it's our project management office, they're doing their training, and so on and so forth. So you've got all these disparate buckets that are all providing different training. But the reality is there needs to be like this convergence of it, because it's all happening at once. And the skills are all merging at rapid speeds. And learning strategies are kind of lagging behind that a little bit, and they have to catch up.
And I think one of the interesting things, and we see it in the comments, someone said, I think that critical thinking skills are really lacking when it comes to evaluating LLM generated outputs. And what's also really interesting is that AI is doing a lot of the foundational work that junior employees would come in and do. And so we need junior employees to use AI and have the critical thinking skills, but how are they going to get those critical thinking skills if they're not doing foundational work and, doing it wrong and getting the feedback and making mistakes and, being told by a boss or a leader that, oh, that's wrong, you should think about it this way. So I think that's a really interesting shift. And I'm interested in Tynan, your thoughts on what that looks like for junior roles.
Yeah, and from a junior role standpoint, yeah, I mean that's how they built their own judgment. They built it based on the work that they did, right, or the work that they kind of got through experience. So if you think about that, they wrote first drafts, they had to do research related to stuff, they made mistakes. They got feedback from peers or other leaders, managers, whoever. And over the years, they honed those skill sets, right? And so it's just like any other skill. It takes practice, and you have to be able to learn from your mistakes and celebrate your successes. The challenge, though, is that AI is doing a lot of that, right? So it'll go at it pretty heavy and take care of a lot of that stuff right from the get go. And so that's great for getting things done quickly, but you're kind of missing out on opportunities for employees. And I also would argue that if not only junior level people, but there's a potential that that muscle could atrophy in existing managers or long-standing people where they just get complacent and they just allow AI to just do the work and they take a lazy approach to it, right? Mm-hmm. So that could also be a byproduct. So development really has to be a little bit more deliberate when it comes to this stuff. And so there's a couple ways to approach that. There's one, you have to make sure that you give employees a chance to walk through real world scenarios. And you can't just, mail that in through like videos or whatever approach that you take, right? I think you also have to pair them with experienced people and you have to give them an opportunity for coaching and mentoring on how that judgment transfers from one person to another, because that's a really good way to share knowledge is through peer-to-peer mentoring. And then I think you also kind of have to ask employees to kind of regularly walk through how they made the decision, explain their thinking. And that's when you're going to find out whether they really got, whether they're gaining the experience and the judgment that's actually necessary. And you guys can get all ahead of this if they're willing to develop judgment. Sorry, a little bit of a collision of words there. But you have to be deliberate about it. And you have to make sure that you kind of have that process in place. And it's really funny, we may find that there's skill sets that people used to have, and there'll be a resurgence of skills that were taken for granted over these years. And now they'll make a surge come back because of the impact of AI. So, but the important thing is to do that and put those in place before others, and so that you're not missing anything.
And
I feel like
go
the
ahead, Amy.
apprenticeship model is, one that has been a leadership philosophy for many years, and so many of the points that you just hit on, Tynan, really encapsulates the value of pursuing that model as newer employees come into an organization to make sure that they have that organizational specific viewpoint and experience to inform their judgment in that context. So it's great points.
And Keith just put a comment about manager training and having all managers meeting together and learning from each other and giving the ownership to guide adoption, and then additional training for the producer level that could be adopted under that guidance. And Keith is not a plant, but that leads us directly into what does this look like in practice? Let's make it practical. We know that people have the tools. They're probably listening and think, okay, great, we have the tools. Some people are using, other aren't. How do we actually move this? And so we want to share what's worked really well with our customers. And so I am going to share my screen and have Amy and Tynan walk through this sort of three-part process that we're seeing really succeed. So Amy, starting with alignment, why is alignment so important?
Yeah, alignment is very critical anytime you're kicking off a large organizational initiative, and AI is no different. It really sets the tone and expectations, and we talked about that as it relates to the managers translating that. At the end of the day, the frontline employees need to understand the imperative and priority that this initiative, the AI adoption and utilization, has within the broader organization. And so we see a ton of success when our clients take the time, not a ton of time, a 90-minute session to really get everyone on the same page, to make sure they hear kind of from the top down that this is a priority. What are the goals and objectives, and also start to demonstrate the art of the possible. So with a given tool that a company has made the decision to invest in on behalf of all their employees or a subset of their employees, really demonstrating the power that it can bring to making that individual employee's tasks more productive, more efficient, more accelerated, that at the end of the day makes their jobs easier and allows them to have more time and space and energy to think through higher level order tasks that fall onto their plate. And so really the idea in this session is to set the goals, the expectations, to demonstrate the art of the possible, and to get everyone to a very foundational baseline understanding of how does prompting work, what are some good best practices. So immediately people who have never touched the tool before can kind of go into experimentation mode.
Great. And then Tynan, what about tool-specific training? And I think if we asked everyone on this call, there'd be different tools. So, you know, what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. And when we say tool-specific training, we're talking about which AI tool is somebody leveraging, right? So Copilot, Gemini, Grok, Perplexity, whatever, Claude, you name the flavor, right? So we're starting to talk about, getting more specific in there, and it's really getting down to a deeper dive into those products. But more importantly is how do they leverage those technologies in their specific job role, and how would they work differently using AI? And so, if you're a project manager and you're using Grok, what does that look like, right? If you're an accountant and you're using Copilot, what does that look like, right? And so it's sort of that deeper dive, and making sure that we're aligning the technology with the job roles that they do and the type of work that they do. And that's really getting down to, what is it that they're looking to accomplish? So you identify the workloads that need to be done, and then how do you leverage that technology specifically to do a deeper dive? Now, in the case of like Copilot, it goes a little bit one step further. And I guess you could say with Claude and others as well too. But if you're talking about in-app experiences like in Word and Excel, there's other ways to leverage the technology when you're specifically in an app. So there's also deep areas there.
And I think that, we talk about a tale of two prompts sometimes. Three people in three very different roles can use the exact same Copilot or, Claude, and the different prompts are going to get different messaging and they're going to get different results. And so how you actually craft it is really important, and how you think critically about what you want to accomplish is really important, and how you use that tool. And one of the most exciting things, and what we've gotten the greatest feedback, is these promptathons. So, why are promptathons just so great, Amy? I mean, why are they so valuable?
Yeah, so Tynan kind of hit on this earlier, but it really puts your training into practice, into your real world day-to-day workflows. And it allows you an opportunity to collaborate and learn from your peers, as well as the workshop facilitator who's has expertise in AI and these tools, to really understand how the use of these tools can and should show up in a consistent way in the workflows that you are responsible for, and demonstrate the value and document that value so that they become repeatable and start to get embedded into the way that a particular team works. And so I think it's the kind of workshop style nature where we're really thoughtful going in to understand who's in the room and who should be in the breakout groups. Accounting paired with marketing, they don't have a lot of overlap all that often in the types of prompts that they're going to do. But if you put everyone from the accounting team all together and everyone from the marketing team together, I feel like, inherently, even if they have slightly different day-to-day responsibilities, they're understanding each other's worlds and being able to collaboratively work through best practices and prompts that are going to actually make the work that they do for the organization that much stronger and that much more effective. So it's just a really hands-on workshop style experience that takes the high level vision of pursuing AI and demonstrating the art of the possible, to giving people that tool specific experience of how to prompt and how the interface works and where I go to upload a file and provide additional context to the LLM, to ultimately pulling that all together in this promptathon experience so that people not only see it, but actually start using it and understand how it's going to embed into their workflows to make them more effective in the long term.
What I love about these sessions is people break out into groups and they take real problems and they say, okay, what are we going to try and solve? Whether it's a automation or an email backup or a permitting, decision bottleneck. And then they start to see the big picture too. So you mentioned like the bottleneck of the workflows, and when you have multiple people, you have multiple parts of the process. So it allows you to step back. It allows you to get some of those real AI champions and the early adopters with the people who maybe don't know as much. And it's a safe environment to ask questions you're afraid to ask. And then everybody comes back and they present their solutions. And what's so cool is that you're learning from other people's solutions too. And you're like, oh, I didn't even think about using that. I didn't even think to ask that. I didn't even think about automating that. And so you not only are learning from your peers, you're identifying what processes, and then you leave with something built and ready to ship and ready to use, and to bring back to your team to say, oh yeah, I really struggled with this at first. Let me walk you through it. So I think it's just, and they're fun. They're just like really fun, morale boosting. It's exciting. And then one thing we've touched on a lot throughout this is it's not just the tool training, it's not just the prompting, it's not the technical skills. So, we call them AI activators. And Tynan, can you talk about the adjacent skills that are so important to adoption?
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about this throughout this presentation here, and I'm seeing in talking with a lot of customers, and it's about a 6 month after they start rolling everything out and they start getting through some of the early training that you start to see this is all of a sudden those human skills and business process skills and all that sort of stuff start coming to the surface. So you can't overlook that, right? So you have to make sure that you are adding in those human skills along with the technology skills that you're asking people to do. And we've talked about things like critical thinking and communication and judgment. And we have to remember that everyone's managing a new employee, right? And so we have to think about it that way. And so we have a different set of skill sets, and we need to make sure that people understand what that looks like. So when you think about things like change management or Six Sigma for identifying processes, right? Leadership and management skills, critical thinking, as I talked about, project management, all of those are really important. And there's also a new role that is becoming really prevalent in organizations. I would say in large organizations and maybe enterprise level, there's this role called an AI champion. And the AI champion lives and helps support the AI initiative for a respective department. It's not a technical role. It's somebody who is a change agent within the organization who's helping with Copilot adoption or with ChatGPT adoption or Claude adoption or multiple LLM adoption. And so they're helping align work that people do with the appropriate tools and helping identify what's right for AI, what's not right for AI. And so they not only have to know the technology, but they have to have those people skills and the process skills and the ways to identify what's right and what's not right for AI. They have to have all those skill sets. So just don't overthink, don't forget about those skill sets. Make sure that you're thinking about that alongside, because they will rear their ugly head all over the place if you ignore them.
Great. So I want to thank both of you. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I know we had a lot of really great comments in the chat. Thank you so much to everyone. And if you want to ask any questions, we can take a few questions now. I saw one that what industries are seeing the greatest success in AI adoption? And I'm interested. I have some thoughts, but I'm interested in your thoughts with industries leading in terms of implementation.
I feel like we're seeing a lot of prevalence in professional services, financial services,
engineering, and manufacturing, surprisingly, depending on, all manufacturing is a huge bucket, but I would say there's quite a few manufacturing verticals that are really, making some really cool investments and seeing success.
Manufacturing and law. A lot of legal services, and there's some like co-pilots specifically for law, as well as Catherine, fintech, a lot of financial services, banking, credit unions we've been working with, and but I think what's interesting is I don't know that it's industry specific. I really think it's team specific, and you can be a small business with 40 employees who are just killing it at integration and adoption, or you could be a Fortune 100 who's really struggling because you don't have the buy-in and the leadership and the skills to empower your teams to really adopt and implement it effectively. Any other questions from the audience?
I'm seeing one come in here from Alexandria. We're about to plan and host a people leader specific series on AI use as a leader, change champion for your team, and integrating AI into your team's workflow. Any advice as we kick that off? Well, I feel like we hit on quite a few themes that I would pull through and share as advice. First comes to mind is don't ignore that middle management level. So getting the leaders aligned is a phenomenal first step, but thinking about the activation of the leadership's vision and buy-in at that next middle level is going to be really, really critical, followed by, the end user, direct employee. You want to make sure that, yes, they have an understanding of the tool, but everything else that we just talked about. So I would advocate to not forget the middle management layer. They play a really critical role. And also think about this as a longer term trajectory. Introducing this topic, talking about it in this session is going to be phenomenal, but this is not just a couple month initiative. Reality is that this is a multi-year initiative. And so I think to the extent that you set that expectation up front, that you want to make sure everyone has the technical skills and understanding of the tool first and foremost, but then we're going to be continuing to evolve our emphasis over the coming months and years to make sure that holistically we're in a position as an organization to fully embrace AI and shift the way in which we work to do so. I think that would go a long way as well.
I think you also have to establish what is success going to look like and what metrics are you going to tie to that. Now, that's easy to say on the surface and throw it out there and hard in execution, right? Because it's like, well, what metrics should I use? And then next thing you know, 6 months goes by or a year goes by and you still don't know what metrics to measure. So I wouldn't worry so much about, nailing down the exact metric, but I would pick something, right? And it could be adoption, it could be use of the products, it could be best practices, that the number of best practices that come out, or whatever it happens to be. I guess I just wouldn't get hung up on what the metric is, but I would measure something, and it will evolve. And I think the thing that we have seen the most is, and it was a comment that was in there, is everything is moving at such a breakneck speed. Mm-hmm. You cannot, your feet will not be planted in concrete when it comes to this. You're going to have to be agile and you're going to have to roll with it. And the other part is, the technology changes so fast and it does so much more the next iteration, that it's hard to predict what's possible. And so I think just be fluid, be flexible, be understanding, and but pick something to measure, and then just go from there and be willing to adapt.
And I think curiosity is really important, and wanting to really learn by doing. You're going to have to make mistakes and you're going to have to figure things out and have aha moments so that you can really explain that to your teams and lead them. You can't do it if you're scared and you're not learning and you're not growing, and you're not exploring these tools and actually using like real world use cases, to help explain it. Well, I want to thank everyone. At the beginning of 2026, our research told us that technology, process, leadership, and human skills were really important and interconnected. And I think that halfway through the year, that feels even more true. AI is moving really fast, but what we're starting to really understand is that the real work isn't just buying the technology. It's really empowering people with how to use it well. It's fixing the processes that slow it down. It's giving leaders the skills to guide people through the change. And so the companies that get this right won't just simply buy more AI or use more AI. They'll really understand how to turn it into better work. And good luck to all of you. And thank you so much, Tynan and Amy, for joining us today. And like Mariella said, look for this recording in your inbox.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much,
day,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.